All right, we are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. By the time you hear this, it will be Tuesday. We're recording Monday night. And I have a guest on the program. And this guest I ran into during one of my lives when I had the multiple guests on and I was taking guests from the audience, just plucking people out of fucking nowhere. And it's actually worked out pretty well. It was a little scary at first because I know there's freaks out there. And we still run into the freaks, but at least they're friendly freaks. So we got that going for us. And one of the people that came up in one of our lives is a gentleman by the name of Mike Kim. He goes by Mike Kim Veteran. He is very well spoken and had a lot to say. And I said, you should come on the show because you talk enough to give me a break for a fucking show. So
That's true.
Will, Old Soul, all those motherfuckers talk so much that I just go, and that's it. That's all I have to do. And I'm a lazy bastard, so that's the way it works.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, Mike, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
I, I really appreciate you and I came across your material during the election at the right after the announcement of the results, pretty much,
Right,
I
right.
believe. Yeah. And, I appreciated that you had such an open forum for different people. And, I was primarily connected to you with like the comments that I made and everything like that. Just that you
Right.
didn't erase my critical comments. You weren't looking at whether I was, as they say in boxing, jock riding you, or defacing you, which I wasn't. But I was just like presenting different points of view, like everyone else, and I'm just always impressed with what you say and with what the others say. Just the different guests that you have. I was really impressed, and that was great for me in my transition. Not that I'm a snowflake, not that I'm a snowflake. I can deal with things as they go, but I do believe that it's important to preserve American democracy in a very tangible way, in the way that you and the others are pursuing it, instead of like in a lot of the other shows, they just kind of talk about these concepts in a very vague, kind of lost kind of way, without any kind of like real references.
Well, you can get that vague stuff from the mainstream media, and I'm tired of it. We need some information because clearly we've got a country that's misinformed. And I will tell you this: you, whenever I go on my comments, and I don't read my comments that much. I try to, but there's a lot of them, so I don't get to read them all. Um, I don't mind criticism, and I don't mind people saying stuff to me. But if you're a Trump-la-fuck, you're fucking gone. That's just it. There's no two ways about it. And honestly, Mike, I didn't know that you made any criticism
No,
of
no,
me.
no. I didn't make any criticisms at you or anyone. How could I say it? I make criticism at how could I say, at certain uh how could I say it? There's a term in academia about stability in regards to, and you know this, like with your communications background, that stability can be that there's range, right, in regards to what's stable and what's unstable, in regards to frequency, and that in communication that can happen as well. And so a dialogue can take me, to the Reagan era, where
Right.
I could, yeah, an example of that was like Carter, when your guests, I mean, that one guy, I forgot his name, I, I believe he's got like a theological background, but he was talking a lot about Carter, and he gave a great response, or gave a great discussion on Carter. So did you. I loved Carter as a kid, but at the same time, he was no friend to unions, in many
Yeah.
ways. And maybe I may not know everything about Carter, but that was one thing, and that was about it. Those are I base my point on reality, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I picked up new knowledge from you and he. So I in no way was it
Well,
it wasn't undermining.
I'm not worried about it. I don't care. I've been married 41 years. If I can't get used to criticism by now, I don't know what the fuck. But the guy you're talking about is not a theologian. His name is Ed. He's a guy I worked in with radio for 25 years.
Mm,
He's a radio guy. He was an actor, and
mm.
he's retired now. And so he's not a theologian. And I think he's essentially an atheist. And he's very liberal. He's
He seemed
probably
like a
more liberal than I.
philosopher, right? But for for some reason I thought he was like straight out of academia, kind of like me, in many ways, So
Well, he's educated. He does
yeah,
have a college degree. Me,
yeah.
on the other hand, the extent of my academia, my post-secondary academia, I've told this story before. It amounted to 1 year in college where I focused on drinking beer and partying. And after that first year, there was a mutual agreement between me and the college that I had learned as much as I could possibly learn. They allowed me to test out and just told me to go away. So I got 1 year of college under my belt. The other learning I've gotten is being curious and aware of what's going on around me in my 64 years. Why don't you
And
go?
and
Why don't you
and let me
explain
just
this who
say
you are?
something real quick about that. That's real. The ancient Greeks called that real education, paideia. And I'm not saying that's the real Ben Franklin. That's all that. That's the real. That's the real learning. And
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree. I agree. Why don't you tell people about yourself so as we get into this, we know where you're coming from. You're talking about the academia part where you were involved in the military. Just
Mhm.
give us a rough overview of who you are and what you've done.
Okay, I'm going to give you 2 hours. No, I'm going to give you about 10. I'm going to try to do the elevator. My name is Mike Kim. You could look up my stuff, Mike Kim veteran, as far as my background. And basically, I've been known as like a whistleblower, in and out of the military with the federal government. I was with the Department of Veterans Affairs, but under a special program. It's called, if you look under Mike Fisher, who I get along with. He's the director of. He's a sub deputy. Mike Fisher called the program RCS, the Special Forces of the VA, and basically, we've dealt with. We started the diagnosis of PTSD. Our program. We worked with the first Vietnam veterans. Back in 1979, we had a certain. Our own budget, Max Cleland, the great Max Cleland, he helped start this program, and it was Carter who did help us form out. So I had a career in that, because I love being in that kind of small unit area, so much so that I chose not to be career military, but career federal through that
Okay.
program. But I was in the military four different times, going back to 1986. I'm also a distinguished. I don't know if it's distinguished, but it's because I like my sauce too, and doing other things and getting in trouble at Norwich Military College, and I was I was an honor graduate there, and I was a commissioned officer, but I also was enlisted prior. I have experience also in Iraq. I was with tactical civil affairs team. I rejoined the military almost 20 years later, and I also I was a Dominican friar monk for about 10 years, and I did a lot of
Oh,
studies in just war theory. As a matter of fact, don't tell anyone, but I was pretty much kind of like kicked out of Oxford after um, two 2 weeks, because I just couldn't deal with the food, and I couldn't deal with the people. But I still, kept my vows and pursued my academic life. And yeah, I went to Yale. I went to, I received another master's at Columbia University. And I'm pretty much at the tail end of my doctorate at Columbia. And I do research, and I focus a lot on war trauma culture, and I focus on military culture and how the military is tied to our society. And I believe that there, on the two spectrums, there's militarism side, and then the civilian side on the other end. And I always feel like we always have to move towards that sweet spot in the middle. And so my job, as a good manager of data, a good examiner of data, whether in uniform or not being in uniform, it's looking at kind of where's the concentration of a lot of this data coming from, like the military, and how it intersects with the civilian world, and then I pick out themes from there.
Now, coming on my TikTok live, how did you end up there? How did you end up on TikTok, first of all, and how did you end up in my live? What was the impetus for all that?
To be quite honest, I just think you got caught up with too many smart Korean, Dominican, Asian cats on the internet, as far as presenting things. No, I got caught up with you on YouTube, and like I said, I was posting a lot of stuff. I know you have I know you're not whatever, you're not profiling or doing anything like that, but I mean, you come across, there's a lot of Asian people throughout the internet right now making a huge impression. I mean, right now, the latest thing is that one Asian channel that does that has exposed Elon Musk. But I think the other connection is that I mentioned to you that I also have like a podcast show called Veteran, etc. And I think you check some of that stuff out, and so that's why.
That's what I was going to ask you. With as knowledgeable as you are and as vocal as you are, I would presume you have some kind of online presence. So you might as well tell us what that is, so people can check that out if they so desire.
Yeah, I'm just getting old, so I forget. You just look better than me. But Veteran, it's called Veteran, etc. Veteran ET, and then CETERA. I think I may need another degree to learn how to spell. Okay. I got into these schools through my good looks, if you could tell. You better laugh.
But good looks weren't a help to me either. So,
but yeah, that show's under. It's a through a nonprofit veteran education, military education program. I'm serious. They're straight up great people coming home well. They're completely legit. They're out of Virginia. They have they have a radio network. My show made the top 40 in military veteran podcasting in 1 year. But I started podcasting in veteran and military wellness since 2016 with Warrior Wellness and Life Worlds. That's a long ass title, but I didn't have your communications background to kind of figure that out. But yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. I understand that you're dealing with veterans and that sort of thing. When you look at our political situation here, we had Joe Biden for 4 years, Donald Trump before that, now Donald Trump coming up on January 20th. What's your overall feelings about the military and our society in general, given what we're looking at that's ahead of us?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think MAGA took. I mean, I'll be very frank with you. I think MAGA took over Trump because Trump's an opportunist. I think you've said it before. I think other guests have said it before. I love Will and his commentaries on the economy. I mean, you guys and political economy, you guys could go up to Yale and Columbia and whop those. I'm not making a racist. I mean, you could whip those guys. Those professors who talk about politics and the economy with a lot of your what's called realism, and I'm a neo-realist. I think I would classify that from academic terms, but you present the realism that's unfolding now, and what's happened before. And I look at 2016 for me as interesting because though I supported, I supported Bernie, and I come from a philosophical background. With religion, because I was a Catholic monk, a Dominican friar, and up in Minnesota, you guys have all, St. Aquinas University, right. I believe, I knew a couple nuns that taught there. So I was influenced by Catholic social teaching even as a kid, that you gotta respect the rights of human beings, living wage, work, purpose, all that kind of stuff, but in a way that truly respects the human being. And I think that a lot of the talk about veterans that I've been into aligned more with, believe it or not, back in 2015, 2016 with Trump, because he was doing like what he's doing now, he promised the world to everyone, and back in 2015, Bannon, who with a lot of these people, I do research on them, on their personal lives. So I, not to trash them, but it's all public record stuff and it's all factual. So I understand, for example, Bannon and Trump and a lot of these guys, they come from that guy, what's his name? Voight. He was during the Reagan administration, huh?
His name is Vought.
Yeah,
Vought is someone.
Yeah, these guys come from a certain, and I'm not into militarism, so to be quite honest, I believe you could serve your family, you could serve your country, you could serve, humanity. You don't have to be, you don't have to wear jump wings or have a uniform to be an American or to be a decent human being.
You can be of service in a lot of ways.
Service, right. So that's the ethical. I believe I grew up on ethics. My parents taught me ethics, and the Catholic social teaching is about like ethics, the particulars, not just like this what Trump talks about, and remember that guy, who was that guy back when I was younger? Family values, the National Guard guy from Indiana. He was vice president.
Pence?
No, sorry. He was inspired by Pence, or no, yeah, he inspired Pence. He was the vice president during George H. Bush, who was more kind of like a liberal conservative, Rockefeller conservative.
You're talking about the guy that can't spell tomatoes.
Yeah. That guy.
It started with a Q. I don't remember. He was worthless. Quayle, yeah. Quayle. Yeah, I'm glad you're going to have to help me out with this. Like, give a letter, give whatever a reference, and then I'll remember things. We'll play a little charades. 2 words sounds like.
Right.
So I couldn't get it right at first either. Well,
but 2016. They were promising these people, these guys, they came from kind of the Vietnam era, but they didn't see combat. They avoided the draft in any way. Bannon did too. And I had, believe it or not, a commander. One big reason why I made a whistleblower was one guy was talking all this shit, and excuse my language, but he chose to go to a service academy. He chose to go to the Coast Guard Academy during the height of the Vietnam War, and then now he's telling me all this when I had joined though I was in a military college, I joined up for a Marine Special Operations Capable Unit. I got my jump wings. It was a reserve unit, but it's a hardcore unit. Special Operations is Special Operations. Special Operations Capable is Special Operations Capable. Whether it's reserve or active, shit goes down, you get sent. That's the bottom line. But, so these are the type of guys that we're talking about. They're kind of like these useless bureaucrats. They have all this ideology tied to like not looking at the direct reality of, as they say, the Joes, the troops. And that's what I look at. And with the veteran community, that's what I look at. And in 2015, there was a big push that it was going to go, that all these promises for veterans were going to happen. There was Trump, his people, his media people set up false accounts, what I found, because they were not real. After I found this out right after he was elected, because I tried to contact them to do things, you know, because I'm a doer. If you look at my background, and they were all like bots. And so he had created a whole artificial terrain, as they say, artificial human terrain, as they say in the military, a human terrain, and it was artificial, and it was like something about empowering veterans, but it was only to get veteran support. And I kind of felt let down because I was more a Bernie guy who was neutral in my old podcast. And then I ended up losing a lot of friends and a lot of support because, you know, I started looking at my job, and he was saying he was going to protect whistleblowers. He set up an office to basically it was what we have, you know, with the Project 2025 and then the Schedule F and everything, that office that he set up, I contacted the Marine. He had a Marine to set that office up. I forgot the name of that office, but it was to protect VA whistleblowers. And I had already won. Yeah, did I win? Yeah, I had pretty much like won my whistleblower that particular time, but I knew that, you know, you're never going to be promoted to be director like before of like the whole VA, like they were saying, you know, I could possibly go places. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, explain to me. You talked about being a whistleblower.
Yeah.
Tell me what that means. What was it that you were whistleblowing? What kind of things were you involved in, and how do you become a whistleblower? Is it just something that happens, or is that?
Yeah.
That's not a job description. That's just somebody.
Yeah, people do see me as that in many ways, but that's not. No, I ended up, you know, doing a lot of things. I was first of all, I believe, if not the youngest, I was like one of the youngest official psychoanalysts in New York City when they started licensure. So that's like a major thing as far as studying trauma. I had extensive studies with trauma when the war began. And I did that. I transferred a lot of that knowledge into my work, my day-to-day work. And after a while, I just got fed up of watching certain things happen in regards to, I'm not calling everything racism, but racially problematic issues go on in federal service, not just with me, with other people. And I was vocal about it. I was vocal about that while I was in the military. And I was able to prove my case that it did happen. That's why I got, if you look at my discharge papers, I have an honorable discharge with the highest discharge level, RE1 code. Usually, if you're a troublemaker, if you voice things out, they will try to drum you out, and then they won't let you return. I even ended up getting on the draft board. I was Manhattan. I recently gave up. I want to be closer to my son and also focus on my research. I'm just tired. I did 7 years as a volunteer on it's not a draft board anymore, but the selective service system. I was nominated by Andrew Cuomo for Manhattan, which is one of the most challenging boards in the whole country because of the economic divisions and racial divisions, New York. And I was appointed by Trump. So I was vetted by both. So, I mean, I know my ethics are you know, up there. And yeah, I had some issues, but I guess they were kind of like overlooked because I kind of presented not only just race issues, but issues of mismanagement during the time of the war. We had a guy, I don't know if you remember, one of the best generals in the whole wide world, and he was crucified by the Republicans, and he was ultimately stabbed to use a religious metaphor, by the centurion Obama, who got General Shinseki, to step down, if you remember, around 2014 from the VA. And he was doing all the great things to help Vietnam veterans, Iraq war veterans. But, you know, they didn't
Why was
want
he?
me.
Why was he made to step down? What happened? There's obviously
Well, if
got to
you
be some
remember back
incident.
then in 2013, the press we have this war, much like what's happening now. They're talking about like this bomber, in Las Vegas. They're getting so caught up with like all the minute details of the Tesla vehicle and all the chemicals and everything. But they're not talking about that. His wife left him like 2 days ago and made accusations or made some kind of there's some kind of insinuation of cheating, which in the military, a lot of people, again, I know this because I study military culture, and I know the rule book in and out. um
Yeah.
it's not just these high-ranking officers that get in trouble for adultery and are responsible, that can lose their pensions, that can, be disciplined, harshly court-martialed. To be quite honest, this is something that hasn't been mentioned, but this guy, his wife is accusing him of, he just had a daughter. He and his wife had a daughter. I guess she was pursuing divorce, and something came up with cheating. And he's a master sergeant. He's a master sergeant in special forces. The team sergeant. In special forces. There's 12 member teams. You have the officer. It's kind of like the TV show, The A Team, and there's the officer. I think, who was that actor, Papard?
Yeah.
Papard, and yeah, and then there was the other guy, and then he was kind of like the warrant officer, the real smart guy, and then there's a team sergeant. I forgot who the team sergeant was, but that's who Livelsberger was. He was the team sergeant, and so he's got a child. He's gonna possibly face, if he was alive, he was gonna possibly face some type of adultery charge if that came out in the divorce. These are motives to look at. Serious, affecting.
So what you're suggesting is that people looking at this as some political statement or whatever,
Right.
But regardless if we're talking about military or otherwise, there could be some emotional issues. There could be some personal trouble issues wrapped in something. People are always looking to dig in and fight a conspiracy or
right. Right.
But honestly, you got to admit, taking a Tesla Cybertruck and blowing it up under a Trump sign, that there had to be something to that too. I mean, there had to be a reason, however crazy that reason might be.
Yeah, of course. But so one thing that people don't talk about, they talk about, his PTSD, his depression. If any of you academicians, I know you guys go on my Facebook and stuff, and you see my posts, and I use certain terms that I've used in lectures and in my articles. You can't just use those terms without crediting me. And so one term that I have used, that I think within military culture, that our society and the military kind of adopts unconsciously, also consciously, but unconsciously. But where the real conspiracies are in many ways is this moral injury angelism, I call it. And that is that, okay, just because you serve your angel, hey, there are people that I didn't like on active duty, people I went to war with that I felt like, actually, I'll be honest, I've been through a lot of therapy and to work on stuff, but that I really had like a lot of rage towards. There were people I loved. It's not all this universalism of Band of Brothers, and we're not all honorable. Even special forces. I don't know if you remember in the 80s at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, there was that special forces doctor who killed himself, and he killed his family. And then he was trying to blame other people and stuff like that.
Right.
Remember that, So,
Yeah.
so you could be an officer. You could go to West Point. There are people in the brig that went to West Point. It's not just, people like you and I who talk about, raw things in life, and who may have had to like really work, a job when we were younger, may not have had all that privilege in life. It's not just those people. It's not just those people of color. It's not just immigrant troops. It's not just poor white guys and gals who are responsible for the real tragedies in military daily life when they happen, as well as atrocities overseas, which this guy, he kind of talks about. And I did some research, and this is why I think the problem with like the Sean, I was ready to call him a preacher, Sean Copeland. I don't know if you remember him from the 70s and 80s. He was like a big grifter. No, but this guy is a former Navy SEAL who claims he was kind of like, he went rogue. He was like a CIA contractor, Sean Ryan. He's got a real popular show, and he's tied with a lot of
Oh yeah.
politicians. He even had Chris Miller, who was the acting secretary during Trump. Department of Defense, who basically wrote a major chapter, the defense part and the veteran part, as far as making cutbacks or indirectly making cutbacks on veteran benefits, and also making comments against taking all DEI programs out when he was on board prior loosely, but he gutted it what Secretary Esper, who was a very honorable man under the Trump administration, when after George Floyd, he said the military has to be reevaluated. All the justice system within the military, it's problematic. You have disparities there. You've got disparities in rank. You've got all kinds of stuff, and you have people like Chris Miller come in, and they set the tone. And I think Trump took that on for his present strategy to put people that are just yes men.
You mentioned Sean Ryan. He's a guy
Yeah,
that has a podcast. As you said,
yeah,
he was in special forces.
yeah.
And I was
Navy
talking to
SEAL.
one of the guests on here before, and he wanted to ask a question about Sean Ryan and what people thought about this whole show he had, where he had this guy come on with this alleged email from the
Right,
Las Vegas bomber.
right.
Was it legit? Was it a good idea if it was legit? Well, which I assume you saw that. I didn't see the whole podcast, but I saw portions of it, and it
Yeah,
was very compelling if it was true. But I was wondering what you thought of that.
okay, let's do a little background with Sean Ryan. I know he comes from like an honorable family. His father was like a naval officer. He's from Hawaii. He's a smart guy. He was enlisted, but so he really wanted to be a Navy SEAL. He went to UCLA. He had like a UCLA degree prior to being a SEAL. So he really wanted to be a SEAL. Like I kind of like this guy, I think could have gone to college. He ended up getting a degree actually from my military college. I'll explain some of that later. But, this guy's no dummy. But at the same time, the problem is you've seen this in the world. There are guys who have the brains, they have the looks, but they may not have, and they may talk morality, but their ethics are problematic. And so with him, my big thing with him, before I was just saying, well, he's got his grift on. You got all these special operators. They got their shows. They're able to do that. That's okay. This is a free market, free country, all this kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
when the election came with Harris, he was putting a lot of extremists on. I wouldn't say extreme. I don't know, bordering extremists. I don't know. But the bottom line is he started some rumor mill going on with Kamala Harris and Biden in regards to the FEMA. He was part of that disinformation and misinformation about FEMA during those hurricanes hitting Appalachia and North Carolina. And then he had to recant that, the next day, because I think this, the government, got onto him, because it's like, this is like disinformation, misinformation. So he has that tendency where he's not fact checking someone who's operating that type of operation. You should have like fact checkers. I know my sister, she worked with Leslie Stahl, and her boyfriend was one of the hired fact checker, and this was like back in the 90s, I mean,
Yeah, that doesn't. That's why I've said there is no journalism in this country anymore. I grew up in a time where there was actually journalism. Nobody checks anything. They see the sexiest, the most salacious thing, and they want to get it on first. And it's kind of like my attitude in life. I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission. But that's unfortunate, because you can't do that and be a journalist. It just doesn't work that way. And when I look at somebody like Sean Ryan, I don't watch a lot of his stuff. But he's fallen into the same trap a lot of podcasters have, a lot of mainstream media have. got to get viewers, got to get money. And the content is only secondary. They adjust the content to get their end goal. And that's one of the problems we have with a lot of podcasts and mainstream media. It's about the viewers, it's about the money. And that's why,
and the ideology. He's caught up with MAGA ideology, even though he doesn't claim it. And I'm saying it from my perspective, just from what I do a lot of media studies analysis, and from what I notice, he rarely has, at least Joe Rogan, I don't know where he's at, but at least he'll have Bernie Sanders on board. You know what I mean? This guy only has like these high profile, you know, people like Eddie Gallagher. I'm not judging him. He was a product of the 20-year war in many ways, but he's just focused on having this kind of like ideology, and I wouldn't be surprised. I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised if he's getting some kind of support. Like there are a lot of intellectuals out there nowadays getting support from think tanks, from like the Heritage Foundation, from different groups, and they're encouraged to pass on disinformation and misinformation. So you have Tim Ryan doing that, but he did that. The show that you're talking about is problematic because the FBI did confirm that the bomber did want to talk to him, so there were plans. He contacted him. Now, I don't know when, if the FBI actually got that information. If someone contacted me, I know what I would do. And if someone contacted me, talking about any kind of stuff that even, would allude to something. I mean, this guy was a Navy SEAL. He was a CIA contractor. You pick up the signs. That's beyond my pay grade, as they say. I would just contact the FBI and hand that information to them, and I could still make a show and whatever, but I check with the FBI and find out what they'd let me say. But it just seemed as though this guy showed up, the guy, the middleman, I believe his last name is Shoemate. He was a intelligence warrant officer. And so he's done some stuff on the internet as well. And so I believe the bomber had sent, information to him, but people need to make the distinction that those are, there's the email that Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of put up there. There's like one email. I don't know. There was like two major emails, I think, from this guy. There might be more, but that's what I know of. And Marjorie Taylor Greene had put the one about the drones, and then I don't know, some other political stuff about veterans need to unite or all that kind of stuff. Well, there's actually, what I think is, what we have to do is compare, and this is what I do. I look at all kinds of documents. As Americans, we kind of do like what you were saying. We just go with what's the fastest information that goes out there. We don't look at we don't go back and forth as an iterative practice of going back and forth on things and checking out other documents. For example, the FBI has a 6-page manifesto, like in his, like I have, when I do my research, when I do my oral histories, when I do my narratives, I go out to the field and I take my phone and I have an app, a notes app. And apparently he uses that, the bomber used that, Matthew Livelsberger. Livelsberger. And so he had a whole manifesto on there. And I'm saying, which is the more credible in regards to thinking of the guy had chronic pain from a back injury through his, he was a legit career kind of guy, 19 years, doing special forces, 9 deployments, five to Afghanistan. That back was definitely hurting him. He had an explosion traumatic brain injury, which people don't understand. That's actually between the injury, the back injury, and the psycho, what they call in mental health psychology issues. In other words, if you're affected because of back problems relating to your wife, you know what I mean, sexually or communication wise or whatever, because you're on different medications. For example, I had this incredible girlfriend after I came back from Iraq. I don't know if she was my girlfriend. I mean, we were going out. You know we did the nasty. I wanted her to be my girlfriend. She was a Harvard graduate, beautiful blonde. Her dad was a distinguished Army officer, got his doctorate from Princeton. She got a Harvard law degree. She was a former military officer. She worked Wall Street for so many years. She ruined her back, and she had back surgery. And I remember her relating with me and communicating with me was very limited in many ways. And she ended up breaking up with me and stuff like that. I think I challenged her on stuff, and those are health psychology issues, right? And that's what I think he was going through that the media doesn't talk about. Traumatic brain injury, which really messes with your executive functioning. This right here gives us the power to make the decisions, day-to-day life. Look at his background. A lot of people, they're not looking at his background. Like he made I believe one report is that this bomber took the wrong route and put Las Vegas, New Mexico. He's a special forces team sergeant, and then he gets delayed or whatever. And then he's in, I don't know, then he's saying he's going to the Grand Canyon or something like that. And then he decides not to or something. He ends up in Vegas. All this erratic kind of stuff isn't being mentioned. Instead, the hero worship is being mentioned, and this angelism that I'm talking about, that, well, he did, he's got 5 bronze, he did 5 deployments in special forces. Those are like, except for, I would say, his one, and I'm just saying this out of my view, with the most honor and respect, but the testimonies that I've gotten, because I have over 20,000 clinical hours in war trauma therapy. I've done POWs from World War II, Korean War vets, World War II vets, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, all the small wars. I'm probably one of the few that have gotten to really do serious assessments prior to giving treatment to folks. And so, someone like him, looking at his background, like just the different patterns and the timeline and everything, this is stuff that the media and people like Sean Ryan and others, they kind of minimize, a lot of this erratic kind of behavior, the writing, that he was married twice. The first wife was very, she supported Bernie Sanders, was politically different from him. And I believe they clashed. And so a lot of his writings that Marjorie Taylor Greene writes, and what this guy featured, the guy with the email, he talks about, he shares the information from the bomber that's kind of like talking down on DEI and talking about this America and Trump. To be quite honest, this is just my opinion. I think he purposely, and people aren't talking about it, he blew that car up, at the Trump hotel, because he knew he wasn't going to get in trouble, because he's got, and in one of the emails or in one of the letters, he mentions Hegseth, that he wanted Hegseth to know about, some things, and so I think he was going to get, he's going to get treated as kind of like a hero, and not so much. You would think that, Trump is kind of like staying away from it. It's not really hurting his reputation. It didn't kill anyone. It made a statement. And in many ways, it's a way to actually gain support for what's going to happen soon, right?
Right.
Inauguration.
Well, let me just say this. One of the reasons I don't think they're talking about him as much as the one in New Orleans is because that guy happens to be white. Unfortunately, the
Yeah,
racist aspect of it does
yeah,
come into play. I
yeah.
just want to say something about that Sean Ryan. I'm just making a judgment here. It's my judgment. I don't give a fuck what anybody else thinks. Sean Ryan, well, he's a special forces guy. He's in the military. I think a lot of people co-opt that part of their life and try to, not everybody, but they try to turn it into money. I look at
Right.
Sean Ryan as basically um, a slightly less crazy than Alex Jones.
Yes, yes, yes.
Did that
That,
make sense?
yeah.
The other question I have, and this would suggest this guy's
Look, I'm
just kind of
sorry.
this guy.
I'm sorry. I moved. I am in my apartment. I'm in a New York apartment, and it's, kind of like, I live in Hell's Kitchen, and these were longshoremen. Talk about labor. And I always had, even when I did my early clinical work, I saw a lot of transition working with the homeless, in this neighborhood back, when Giuliani was mayor. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, longshoremen families lived here, and so the heating system is like radiator. So if you hear stuff, I'm moving. It's not like I'm dodging my ex girlfriend or anything, any pots and pans. I'm just like moving locations so the audience can kind of get like clear comms, clear
No, no, no,
communications.
no problem at all. And with your military background, I'm not worried about you. I think you'll be fine.
Okay.
Um, all right, Mike. What I'm getting from what you're talking about with this guy that blew up the Tesla truck in front of the Trump hotel is that people are trying to make it out to be a certain, conspiracy theory and that it's a mastermind and they planned this out. But this guy had a lot of other issues. The one question I think everybody asks, and you'd be a good person to ask this, here's a guy that was in the Green Beret, Special Forces. He knows his shit. He can do some stuff. So he pulls up in front of Trump Hotel. Apparently, he shot himself before everything happened. And then the explosion went off, and the explosion was substantial, but it was a bunch of gas cans, maybe some jet fuel, and some fireworks. That doesn't strike me as something that a special forces guy would do. He has the ability to create explosives that are far more sophisticated than that and far more damaging than that. Why do you think that happened? Was it just something he did at the last moment?
Well, I think it's really interesting because, there's like reputation management on many different levels, and that's what's talked about in media studies as well as what these corporate consultants focus on. And so I think he wanted to, one, make a statement. He wanted to, do it in a way where it wasn't really gonna kill anyone, and he wanted to do it in a place. Again, a lot of people may disagree with me, but I think he was looking at Trump Hotel as more of a safe space, in many ways to get this off. And so, from what I kind of gathered before the formal investigation, I really think, I don't know. I think the Vegas police department, they're giving these, and I wanted to get your view on this in regards to communication, your background in communication and radio. Like, why are they not like just, they're selectively giving all this type of information out, and and it's problematic. But I think he had a combination of a lot of mental health issues. He still had it in him, 19 years in special forces. He had to know how to make explosives, but in a big way. But I think, it's coming out that he was using Chat GPT because, in special forces, you learn how to really destroy villages using explosives. It doesn't take a genius. Look at the Rambo Rambo 2 movie. Remember where he goes back to Vietnam with the bow and arrow and he's using explosives, and then in Afghanistan, so these selective targets, So he knows this kind of stuff, but he was actually using Chat GPT, I believe, to kind of create kind of like diversion. It's kind of like if you see that movie Sicario, and Josh Brolin's awesome. He kind of, there's a scene where he just says, "All right, boys, let's just create, some diversion." And I just think that's what, he was doing, you know. That's what he was
So,
doing. And I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I also want to ask you about your views on the communications on all of this, because I respect you on these matters.
well, I think the problem we have with the communications is the problem we have all the way down the line, from the mainstream media to even some people in the independent media, from police departments, from the military. Nobody tells us the whole story. Nobody tells us the whole story. That's why when you watch mainstream media, you can watch Fox News and you can watch MSNBC, and two people watching separate sources can't agree on anything because they have different stories. And I think everybody has a different story. They figure out what story is going to be best for them, when all we really want is the fucking truth. But people want to shade the truth, they want to twist it, they want to distract from it, and it's all about their own enrichment. And it gets tiring, and that's one of the problems we have in this country. That everybody's putting on a fucking show. And this guy, it's a perfect example with this guy. This guy wasn't trying to be Timothy McVeigh and taking down a
Right.
hospital. He was putting on a show. He wanted an event. He didn't want to blow anything up other than that Tesla. I got to be honest with you. What better thing to fucking blow up than that ugly piece of shit? But, um, but it was just a performative thing for him. And that's one of the problems with this country. There's more performance than there is absolutely any substance. And that's why we get nothing done. What's happening in Congress right now? What's happening with this new Trump administration? We're going to do this. We're going to help these people. We're going to shut down the Ukraine war in 24 hours, the first day I get into office. Today he said, well, yeah, I'm hoping 6 months, maybe longer than that. What happened to what you said before? Nobody tells the truth. They shade it, and they're trying to get this perception that's beneficial to them, and it has nothing to do with the truth.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, and it makes me think of. I don't know if it's on. I think it's not on the. It's what he sent to Sean Ryan, or for Sean Ryan's people to see and all that, and to create, this performance, as you're saying. He he mentions the spectacle, that
Right.
that America's caught up with spectacles, and so yeah, that's a great interpretation. And there's a scholar by the name, he's from France, by the name of Debord, Guy Debord, and he writes about how in many ways, like the West and in America and the United States, we rely on spectacle to, not so much high, but it's just like that becomes the substitution for the substance, like what you're saying.
Well, in this culture now, we're not into news or journalism. We're into tabloid type of thing. So you have to have some kind of spectacle to get their attention. But then you've got to follow it up with the substance. Whenever I've given talks and things like that, I always tell some jokes. I always kid around with people. And people come up to me, that's not how you do it. You need the fucking charts, and you need to, but nobody wants to talk to them. I said, you got to get their attention, but you got to give them something of value once you get their attention. Everybody's just trying to get attention, and they have nothing to feed the people. It's just ways to get more attention. And that's the problem. We've got a very, uh, well, you were talking about your background in ethics and how you were raised and stuff. This must be a fucked up time, because there is no ethics anymore, any more than there's journalism.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, when you were growing up and everything, um, can you maybe explain to me, because I've heard scholars talk about it, but you're a scholar in your own right, but I'd rather hear it from you, because um, your
I'll do
scholarship
my best.
is applied, huh? Scholarship, huh?
I'll do my best.
Yeah, no, you deliver. I've been a fan of yours. You deliver. Um, what's the difference, like, between, like, let's say, like, like during, like Vietnam, I mean, there was like, certain performative
Oh,
things, like a Buddhist monk, he was against the government of Vietnam, the
burning
United
himself
States.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, and all that. And how was that kind of like reported, and what was it, I heard about these guys like um Cronkite, and what are some of these other guys that seem like, rather, or some of these guys that I don't know, they just seem very different to Megan, whatever her name is,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know what you're saying, and I've said this before. People worry about the trials and tribulations and the turbulence of this era. And the '60s were just as, if not more, turbulent. There, we had all kinds of problems: four major assassinations, the Vietnam War,
Mm,
civil rights, women's rights. We had all kinds of shit going on in the '60s, and it was a bit crazy. The difference between the reporters was they came out and told you what happened. Now, the government and the media didn't tell you everything that came out, and they didn't immerse you in it because you had TV news in your hometown at like 6 o'clock, and then you had your national news at say 7 o'clock, and that's all you really had. Maybe something would come across the wire on a radio station while you're listening to pop music, but we weren't immersed in all this. We weren't enveloped in this, and people have become kind of addicted to the whole media thing. And the one thing about the fact that with the '60s there was a lot of shit going on, but there's more little shit going on because we know so much so quickly. So say with the monk burning himself up, that was big news for probably a couple of weeks, maybe a month. But nowadays somebody does what the guy does in Las Vegas, and then the next day something else happens. Or the next day Donald Trump says, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America." There's
mm,
always some goofy shit coming up next. And it happens. Donald Trump's a master of this. He creates a scandal, and everybody's going, "Oh my God, a scandal in the '60s would have taken this politician down." But the next day there's another one, and then there's another one, and you forget about the first one. We're constantly spinning our brains onto the next scandal, and we can't focus on getting any justice out of the first one.
hmm hmm
I don't know if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. That explains it well for me because, like I said, you lived it, and not only that, you're a critical thinker, and that type of analysis and interpretation is a value to me, and I'm sure to others. How about radio? Because you have a background in radio. Can you tell me like what happened? Right when I was a kid, I remember. It was who was doing, and I don't want to deviate, but to a certain extent, it does make sense because I was canceled within a lot of military people. I'm pretty much. I mean, I'm progressive, but like I said, I have my religious ethics and all that. But I'm in the middle, or I'm in a lot of things. But tell me about like what happened to radio, for example, like in the like '80s, and how is that different from, let's say, like 80 radio, like in the '60s and stuff like that? Because it just seems as though it's out of control.
Well, radio is kind of dead. I'll tell you
Mm,
this: in some small towns back in the day,
yeah.
there wasn't a lot of money in radio.
Uh-huh.
I worked in some small town radio stations, and what some of those radio stations did, because they didn't really have a market to sell a ton of commercials to make a lot of money, so what they
Yeah.
did is they just turned it over to the churches, and the churches paid X amount of dollars to run a
Mm,
half hour here, hour there. They just became kind of a part of a network of religious shit, and
mhm.
that's kind of what's happening now. Probably 15 years ago, I was working in radio and I heard about the concept of podcast. And that
Mhm.
intrigued me because I worked in radio. And I
Mhm.
thought, fuck, I should try that. And I did. I did some podcasts back in the day, just shit I wanted to do. I was doing traffic. There's no creativity in that. So I did some podcasts. Now, nobody was making any money off of podcasts, and there was not a lot of listeners doing podcasts. But at that moment, that's the one prediction that I made that I stand by, and it's kind of coming true right now. I said, the moment this podcasting comes true and it gets popular, it's going to end radio
Mhm.
because of the technology. It makes it more functional than radio. Radio, you turn it on, you hear 15, 16, 17 minutes of commercials, you hear the same songs over and over, you hear the same guys doing their shows at certain times of the day. If you can get what you want when you want it, it's of course going to be better. Now, in the 60s, I was pretty young. I was in my single digits in the 60s. It was just, coming out of its heyday in the 40s, when everybody listened to the radio, and there was a transition to television, and they said that television was going to kill radio, which it didn't do. Um, but radio changed into kind of pop music or old school music. Everybody had their little format and they did it. But it was always very formulaic. There were a few talk type stations or clear channel stations, like here we have WCCO, and they did a variety of things. But in the 80s, that's when the slide came, because we started getting CDs. And then when the 90s came, we started getting computers and the iPods and all that kind of stuff. Radio's taking a beating, and anybody who decides they want to go into radio now is fucking crazy, because what they're doing now, to a large extent, they're joining networks like the Sinclair group, which is all Trump-la-fuck shit, and all they're
Mm.
doing is running network type stuff. So nobody's working at that radio station except a couple of people punching buttons. And those people that have shows that aren't talk shows, that are just music type shows, they hire somebody to come in a studio for an hour and a half, 2 hours. They record a bunch of intros, outros, and time checks, and then they feed it into a computer and mix it with the music for the next 6 hours. So
Mhm.
nobody's making money in radio. Anybody that's in radio, the audience is getting smaller every day. Um, People are just turning to a different technology, and that was a slow slide from the 60s all the way up to now. It was getting worse as time went by. um, I never saw radio as really a great news source. There were some
But
stations that were, but
yeah, in the
none of
inner
them were really
city.
focused on it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because what happened with and I wasn't that specific. I should have, and that's why I interrupted you. Um I wanted, because you would know more than I was, because I was a kid, but with Rush Limbaugh, and people are driving to work, people are driving back home, driving to work early in the morning and all that, and so you have like Rush Limbaugh on the radio and all this kind of stuff. Do you think that was like a huge impact
Oh,
in regards to
yeah.
changing the
A-
climate? I wanted to
abs-
ask you
abs-
about that. That's what I wanted to ask you. I should have been specific.
Absolutely. I remember when Rush Limbaugh first came on, and I was working at a radio station, and I'd be coming in or going home or whatever, and I'd listen to Rush Limbaugh. Now, at that time, it wasn't quite as divisive between Republicans and Democrats, and I was young. I didn't give a fuck about politics, but I was listening to Rush Limbaugh, and I thought, okay, this guy's cool. And the reason I thought he was cool is not about what he said. I thought he was a buffoon. But here's a guy who worked in radio and said, fuck it, I'm going to start my own network. And then he becomes successful with it. I respected somebody who was able to do that, because nobody really had ever done that before. But over time, he got full of himself, and he got tied in with a certain faction of politics, and he started to ride that fucking thing. He got involved in drugs, he got involved in all kinds of weird shit, and he was tainted by his own success. Not that he wasn't bad at first, but nobody cared at that point because politics wasn't such a trigger point like it is now. But Rush Limbaugh was the beginning of this whole media thing. He's where Fox News stemmed out of. He's where all this shit stemmed out of.
Mm.
And he's an evil motherfucker, and he's dead, and I'm happy as hell.
Yeah, yeah, and what I see with militarism, I remember that I just remember being, I was in the military from '86 exposed, to the military culture and everything from '86 to pretty much like, I don't know, that 2009. But then I was, tied up with war trauma and stuff. So I was working with, folks
Right.
from the military all the way up until 2018 and all that kind of stuff. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that I noticed back in the '80s, where's this thinking coming from? Because I I was exposed to guys at Norwich Military College, which ironically enough, this guy Livelsberger, he got a degree. This is the oldest after West Point. It was supposed to be it's the home of ROTC and the alternative military generals and leaders who did not want to be like European generals. They did not want a long-standing army. That's what the Norwich tradition comes from. And so anyway, during this war on terrorism, Norwich has always had like innovative programs, like one of the first African Americans, as officers. Anyway, they had a program for special operations active duty personnel to get their bachelor's degrees. And they would, and the program from, I looked at it and it seemed, and I know professors who taught it, you do get exposed to a lot of great material on just war theory, on rule of law, regarding warfare and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just shocked that, or maybe this guy who did do the bombing, maybe he did hear some of those lectures and was affected by that with his actions. He was a communications, he had to handle radios. He was a master of handling radios. So I'm sure he had to call in airstrikes. Who knows what type of collateral damage in regards to Afghanistan forces. You see, a lot of people don't understand that, right? That we have special forces out there in many ways to direct these other armies in wars, and they're committing. It happened to my dad, like in Korea. He had like these American advisors, and he was in a rock infantry unit on the DMZ, and he had like these guys that were totally disconnected,
Right.
from America, telling him what to do, and that's what was happening with Lavsberger in Afghanistan, and he talks about it in indirectly in that one email to Sean Ryan, and in many ways, I see that Sean Ryan. I guess they're like what you said, something a little bit. What did you say? He was a little bit above a what? Uh,
He's a little bit more polished, Alex Jones.
Jones. Yes, yes. And as we all know, Alex Jones isn't all that
He's a
smart,
fucking goof.
right? And he starts exposing himself with with all of this drama with Sandy Hook and all that. Well, and to a certain extent, these guys have kind of exposed certain things in regards to, what the UN has been talking about. And I don't know, Marjorie Taylor Greene, in regards to all of her like nutty behavior, put up Sean Ryan's post. I mean, those are war crimes, that the UN has
Right.
basically said, and that they're recognized. And do we want to, she's talking about funding and talking about, he had issues about Afghanistan and the withdrawal and stuff. Well, do you want to keep on, continuing this type of, incompetent bombing, bombing and collateral damage? And yet, the Daily Beast did an article called Candyman, how Leifesberger used to, give candy to the kids and stuff like that. And so a whole article is done on that. Well, I want to know what was his operational missions and all that, like, not just about the good things he did.
Right. Well, you asked when this all started, and I think as I watched the procession for Jimmy Carter's funeral today,
Mm-hmm.
the moment Jimmy Carter lost and Ronald Reagan took over,
Mm-hmm.
that put us in the deep slide as far as the attack on the middle class and this rabid right, radical right. It's always funny to me when I see the Rush Limbaughs or Sean Hannity's or Tucker Carlson's talking about a tough military. None of these motherfuckers were ever in the military.
Yeah.
Why is it all the guys that talk tough and women that talk tough have no experience in the fucking actual world of military?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's there's a guy Lemke out of Holy Cross. He does a lot of research on, and I'm only mentioning these names so the audience can kind of know that I'm not saying it to trash people, but that the things that I'm saying are tied to like research. Not that research is everything, but you do research too, and you have interpretations that are valid too. It's different people, but anyway, this guy named Lemke is a Vietnam veteran who had done research on the whole thing on Vietnam veterans and getting spat on. And he did, you talked about the Reagan era, and so that, they're killing labor unions. They're, my family's deeply affected because of farming. My dad's a public health. He ended up having to be a public health veterinarian because he could never have the American dream of having a farm and also being a veterinarian out in the country,
Right.
during the Reagan period and when I was a kid. But the thing is that Lemke writes about how, like, in many ways, it's a myth. We live by myths, and the number of Vietnam veterans that actually got spat on in the airport is a lot less. The reality versus what is said in the
Was
Rambo
reported.
movies and all that is it's a lot less. The movies depict it as a lot more than the reality, and he has like
Okay.
research and writes books on that,
Yeah,
on these
and
myths.
that's not surprising. I mean, I knew some Vietnam veterans. I was young at the time. I had friends that had brothers that came back, and I didn't witness that much. But there was a lot of pushback and a lot of protesting against the Vietnam War. They did hold the people who were in the Vietnam War responsible. I
Yeah,
wanted to
but it was
ask you.
Yeah, but
Go ahead.
Reagan was the one that cut money on Agent Orange. If you remember back in those documentaries, and that's when real documentaries during the era you were around. And I wanted to ask you about that too, your view on these very insightful documentaries. But they showed Vietnam veterans on Capitol Hill, and also yelling at at Reagan's different frontmen about Agent Orange research and funding and all that, and he was denying that it even
Right.
existed and all that stuff.
Well, hell, he denied AIDS existed for a long time
Mm.
too. So that's not surprising. That's what I find interesting, and I'm curious. As a veteran yourself, I want to ask this question. It'd be the same question I'd ask farmers. You have Republicans coming out saying, "Oh, we support the farmers. We support our veterans. You got to support our veterans. We're patriots." But when it comes down to it, they always burn them down. They burn down the farmers. They burn down the veterans. Now, when Donald Trump did that the first time, you'd think he'd learn a lesson. But apparently, the veterans and, well, some veterans and the farmers, some farmers have not learned that. They bought the bullshit again. How does that happen?
Most of them have. I think it was like, and I'm sorry, the during earlier part of the show, I got you've given me such a many ways of thinking, and I just I end up acting like a M60 machine gun. That's like a hog, what they call a hog back in the old time Cold War days, So I'm just like rattling off stuff, but I think you got me to calm down some, and that's great. I think it's dealing, with this issue of he says the right things to trigger emotion of Lee Greenwood and all that,
Yeah.
and he gets the emotions going, but he doesn't, he has no real investment towards veterans. Like I said, I try to contact these organizations that were set up. I think some of them got I think Hegseth was like, is that his name?
Yeah,
The guy?
Hegseth, Pete
Yeah,
Hegseth.
yeah. He got in trouble for one of those organizations that were not like really
He
like
got
delivering. Yeah, the
he got
services.
booted.
Yeah, yeah. So you've got like some of these real organizations that aren't, either they don't know how to do the work. You've got these Marjorie Taylor Greene types that are doing veteran programming. I did veteran programming for years. It's a very difficult work. You got to know what you're talking about. You can't just send some social worker from Columbia or Harvard or whatever to, who's a conservative or whatever to go save vets. I mean, it takes a lot of work to do this kind of stuff. And so they get all the funding. You had Wounded Warrior project, which, a couple of years ago, you remember that scandal,
Yeah.
they were taking a lot of the money and it wasn't going to services. And it's like this grift that goes on. And I think that the politicians like Crenshaw, and I want to get
The rep. Yeah.
yeah, I want to get your perspective on that because he was talking a lot about veteran disability. Well, I respect it. He was a war hero. He did lose his eye, but he was like a equivalent to a major. He was a Navy SEAL. Uh, uh, I believe a commander or lieutenant commander in '04. So you come out of there, with your disability, and then you can get your other disability. You're not. It's not like this guy Leifsberger, who if when he retires, he was if he was still living and with the divorce possibly happening, he's not coming out of his career. He's not getting all that deployment pay or anything anymore. He's getting half his salary. So he's looking at, he did all those years, right? All that heroic stuff, and he's probably going to be making $3,000, something like three or $4,000 a month on retirement, and then
Right.
you're not getting all the family allowances and all the other stuff when. So that's something real too that he was probably looking at. The media doesn't look at, and I think veterans, to answer your questions, they don't look at the dollars and cents. They're saying, like Elon Musk and Vivek, they want those stooges want to the VA and everything. They're talking about people on disability. It's only less than 1%, if not 1% of veterans that have a single 100% disability. 2%. I mean, to get that, you got to go through a lot to prove. And yet they're thinking
Yeah.
everybody, every other vet and the mother's driving a Bentley and on disability.
Yeah. What What do you think is we're hearing one of the biggest concerns about Donald Trump being president is what he's going to do with the military, that this crazy fuck's got a connection to the football, to the button. Um, how does the military react to some crazy demands that a president like Donald Trump would make? They say that they are have allegiance to the Constitution, not the president, that they can't react to an illegal order. Are they strong enough to push back against the president, especially if a president's kicking out some generals and putting in his favorites? Are we safe there where that the military is going to be strong enough to push back about crazy shit?
It's really interesting because like with your show, unlike other shows, you talk about the role of Congress, you talk about the executive branch, you talk about the Supreme Court, and you talk about, how all these things work together, and you talk about public off, the public, the power of the public, us. Um, and people don't realize that everything that the the framers of the Constitution, with all their flaws, they were, it really comes back to like the Declaration of Independence in many ways, and this issue of real independence, in many ways, rests on not the executive, like what all Elon and Trump wants to make you look at, what many but it's more an issue of Congress controlling the military. So Congress has to, and like what you've said before, and you've helped me understand Congress better in regards to, even though the media says, oh, the Republicans have Congress. Well, can you explain some of that about margins and all that? Because that makes a difference in regards to different changes in the military and how, different things can actually happen with like a general and war and all of that. So yeah.
Well, that's what I've said before. You're right. Congress does have a lot of the control here. Donald Trump could spew whatever the fuck he wants to spew. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But he's not a king. He's The Constitution doesn't allow for that. If we look at the House of Representatives, Republicans had a thin margin last term, and they got virtually nothing done unless the Democrats were involved. In this term, they have even a thinner margin. So they're going to have a tougher time passing anything because there's always going to be some Republicans that are divided, whether it be MAGA to the relatively normal people. The crazy shit isn't going to pass with a lot of Republicans and certainly none of the Democrats. And then you go to the Senate. If it gets to the Senate, they have 3 seats ahead of the Democrats. Um, but the problem is the one thing we hated the most when we had the majority in the Senate is the thing we're going to love now, and that is the filibuster. And I think the goal of Congress at this point, unfortunately for Democrats, would be to do exactly what the Republicans did and try to block fucking everything. Everything.
Mm-hmm.
Anything
Mm-hmm.
that's crazy, unless the Democrats are able to negotiate some kind of reasonable compromise, which hasn't been that easy with Republicans. But Donald Trump can claim a lot of things, but it's going to have to go through Congress. And even though he has a majority in the House and the Senate, it's still not enough. It's still not big enough. He doesn't have 60 seats in the Senate. He has maybe 2 seats in the House. It's going to be very difficult for him to get anything done. And this is why I've said I'm not so worried about him doing crazy shit. I'm just upset that for the next 2 years, at least, maybe 4 years, nothing is going to get done, and that's going to cost us a lot as people because nothing, they're supposed to be working for us and they're going to do nothing.
Right, right. So I think you've said a lot of insightful things tied to the military in America, and so the other thing that we have to look at is the American industrial complex, and what a lot of people don't understand is within that, though it is toxic, there are people there that are going to, for example, part of that whole Afghanistan, I mean, people always talk about Afghanistan withdrawal. Even Democrats are like, acting all guilty. He did the right thing. Biden did the right thing, and I'll debate anybody
I agree.
all night and day because we were losing that. What we had only a couple provinces compared to, Afghanistan's like 30 some odd provinces. They only show you, the news only showed you, the candy and the Teletubby dolls being sent to Kabul. I was friends with the first female presidential candidate in Afghanistan. Dr. Jalil. She's like only in Kabul now, and she's in Sweden. That's not the daily life of Afghanistan and all that. Look at Vietnam. How much did they lose? How many people did they lose on the withdrawal on the last day? They lost like, I did the statistics on it. A lot of people don't talk about that. The last day in Vietnam was like over several thousand people, troops.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yep. Compared to Afghanistan, I'm not saying those lives were, I mean, any brother or sister who dies in combat for me is a horrible thing. But what I'm saying is compared to like Vietnam, and that withdrawal, the gear and all that was left to the North Vietnamese and all that, it's just like not even in comparison.
well,
And
Donald
Congress
Trump,
makes a big difference. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry.
yeah, it does. And Donald Trump tries to blame Biden about the pullout with Afghanistan. Let's just put it this way. We should have learned a lesson before we even went in there. Russia spent years in there, got nowhere, wasted money, got their people killed. They pull out. So what do? We go back in, which was fucking ridiculous. Now, once they went in, George W. Bush, um, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, all could have pulled them out, should have pulled them out. They
Mm-hmm.
had their opportunities, but they didn't have the courage to do it because they were worried about being reelected. Then Donald Trump creates kind of a plan to pull them out because he wanted to in the end because he didn't know any better and he didn't get to do it because he didn't win. So Joe Biden's given basically a plan of how to do this. Now, when you pull somebody out of a country like this, it's going to get fucking ugly,
Mm-hmm.
especially when Donald Trump releases 5,000, was it Al Qaeda or ISIS people ahead of time? You
Mm-hmm.
release them. That's what Donald Trump did. And of course, they're going to come over and take over once you pull out. But, you know, they're the ones that say we pulled out too fast, and these people got killed, and these 13 uh, military folks were killed, and it is tragic, but um, it's going to get ugly when you pull out. But they want to make America great. They want to be isolationist. So what's their problem with pulling out of Afghanistan? Why didn't they do that when they had the opportunity? And if you want to talk about people dying, how about when we bombed Syria, and how much equipment we left there? We left a lot more equipment there than they left in Afghanistan. So it's just all hype, and it's all bullshit, and
Right. And
it's
yeah,
ridiculous.
it's ridiculous. And earlier I said that, to tie all this to American industrial complex, what people don't understand is they don't want to be disrupted because of the stocks and all that and investors. So if they're looking at a particular type of war, they don't want to be thrown off. You know what I mean? In many ways, like they want, that type of stability in most cases. And what I'm seeing is, I mean, my read is that, because of the economy and everything, Congress and the military industrial complex, with all this uncertainty going on, they may, I'm just saying, they may actually turn their backs on Trump, because I never see, a lot of these contract people, they just, as far as big wigs, I'm not talking about the actual contractors, I never hear them. I've talked to a number of them. They don't talk about Trump or anything, about politics. They're just talking about making that money. And so
Yeah.
if that erratic type of behavior that Trump is this unsound, if he starts taking advice from certain people that are going to lead the country into the military in a whole nother direction away from the American military contract complex, they may turn hard on him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what I'm presuming is going to happen when Donald Trump takes over and he does the things he does. He affects the economy.
Yeah.
He's going to have a lot of people turning on him. He's a lame duck. He's of no value to the Republican Party or the military after that. Once he starts doing crazy shit, he's going to get pushback from the Republicans. Congress isn't going to do what he wants to do, and he's going to look weak. I wouldn't want to be Donald Trump going into this next term. I know he thinks he's king, but he's going to be dog shit this time around as compared to the first time.
Mm-hmm. And the media is going to, the way we do things and you do things, and maybe hopefully certain big media, at times they expose certain things that, like CNN will expose certain things that come out and it's good. And rarely, but they do, like the whole Coast Guard, debacle for years. I don't know. They lost supposedly all these statistics on sexual abuse and racial discrimination cases for decades and stuff. And CNN actually exposed that. But I think what can happen in regards to the future is, what if, let's say, we're in this state of war that Trump wants to put us in, the smaller wars, and they just become so diverse and so intense, and it just becomes to a point where the military industrial complex is not ready to deal with that. That could be
Yeah.
problematic. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think it's going to go here? Donald Trump takes over on January 20th. What do you foresee happening over the next 3 months? Because people are terrified about this, and I don't know that it's going to be as terrifying as what people expect, but I do tend to look at things like a glass half full. What, from your perspective, from a military perspective, what do you foresee?
I'd actually look, since my area is in civil, I think they keep on changing the name, civil military relations or whatever, CMR. So I think you're actually really good with that as far as like informing people on Congress and all these different things. So keep on doing. I'm not telling you what to do, Mike. So don't start
No,
attacking
no,
me.
no problem.
I don't want to get. I don't want to get that heat. But I think you wonderfully, clearly, and I'm not like worshiping you. I just think
No, no.
you have a way of explaining things to people about Congress and stuff. And when it comes to the military, that's what they need. That's what they need to know. What's happening in Congress? There's always on the internet for them to look at, and I do it all the time. Like recently, there's something that came up with DEI, and what's her name? That one African American lawyer. She was talking in Congress and like against the bill to take out DEI from the federal government. Well,
Right.
DOD is over half, if not half, of DOD is federal employees. And
Right.
she had a lot of comments that were directly involved and put a lot of pushback, and that's the kind of stuff. Like the stuff that you explain is important to recognize. It's not just, we don't have like a military of like, I don't know, like in my mom's country, the Dominican Republic, where my family, sadly, certain leaders were very corrupt that my family was a part of. But it's not like that. There's a lot of due process involved. A good book to read is by the previous Trump's first secretary in the administration, Mark Esper, Lebanese
Right.
guy. He stood up to Trump, and that's the type of stuff that I think can happen. But the first 3 months, I wonder if DeSantis. What do you think of this? Do you think maybe they're gonna like throw Hegsby under the bus and maybe have DeSantis? Because maybe DeSantis, though I don't like him, at least he's a military lawyer. He does know how to he does know the military in and out. I mean, this Yahoo knows as much as my son, who's 14, about
But
tactics.
he did say if he gets the job, he will quit drinking. So we got that working for us. Um,
How about the Coke?
Well, he didn't say the Coke, but you got to have some vices.
Yeah, you got
But
it. Yeah.
DeSantis, I don't know. Donald Trump is petty and he's vindictive and he doesn't forget. I don't think he's going to give DeSantis shit. And if he does, it's only so he can crucify him later. I don't think Hegseth will get the job. I mean, there's no way he's going to stand up under uh, uh, a hearing. There's no way he's going to do that. Um, I don't. That's the thing is, what I've always said is Donald Trump has got all these crazy appointees, these nominees, and I think it's more than just that he's goofy and he's got these goofy appointees. I think the people who worked for him in the first term said, "No way, I'm not doing that fucking again. This is a
Yeah,
clown
Matt.
show."
Even Mattis.
Yeah, nobody with any reasonable intelligence is going to work for Donald Trump because they know it ends up in either quitting, getting fired, or getting indicted. Who wants that fucking job?
Yeah, the only thing that I wanted to ask you about is the other thing related to this is what are your thoughts on and Senate and Congress. This is why people value what certain people, all probably all your audience, but like you get into the woods on this. So if Tom Cotton can Tom Cotton, like, so Tom Cotton has a Harvard law degree. He's got all this stuff, and he's out there. I don't like him.
I'm not a
I
fan.
wouldn't support him, but would he give up his? Can he give up his Senate seat to become that?
He
Um,
could. He could.
would it be
I mean,
advantageous or not? I'm just thinking if they start, if Trump is thinking, all right, I'm gonna start getting people who support me, and then who are like my warriors. He's probably the one veteran that can sustain a lot of the arrows.
yeah, you're probably right. I hadn't thought about Tom Cotton. It's not a smart move. I mean, we know he's got a thin margin in the House, and he's got two people in the House that he wants to
Mm,
pull for appointees. That just
mm,
makes it even thinner for the Republicans in the House. Not a great move. They'll have special elections. The one thing about Tom Cotton, though, is because he's a senator, you could technically pull him out of there and put him in that position, and he'd probably be more reasonable than most idiots. At least he's not, like you say, at least he's somewhat qualified. But the good thing about the Senate, you don't have special elections. You just have the governor appoint somebody else. And as long as
Oh,
he comes from a Republican state with a Republican governor, it wouldn't be a risk. They just appoint another Republican to take his seat.
okay,
That's conceivable. That's
right.
conceivable.
Yeah,
I, I
I
think
think,
I,
hmm,
I think Donald Trump is going to stomp his feet for all these goofy fucks. I think a
right.
lot of them aren't going to get approved, so he's going to have to come up with something reasonable. Otherwise, he's not going to get anybody approved.
Right. So I think he's probably going to have his warriors, and I've been following Tom Cotton for a while, and he's lousy, and that's going to ruin the military. The other thing we haven't talked about, and I'd like to get your perspective on this. I know you were younger, but I don't know if you ever heard of it, or knew relatives, during the draft and everything. The government had a program back a long time ago called Project 100,000, where they just basically took poor whites and
Yeah.
African Americans and Latinos and drafted them in the military to fight in Vietnam and everything. And I'm just thinking, with someone like Tom Cotton, we get into a major, because we've already, as they say, I don't want to say you blow your load. I'm talking about a shotgun.
Yeah.
But you blow your load, and that's it. We've done that in Afghanistan, Ukraine, in for good reason. I believe in Ukraine, but Iraq and all these other small wars. We're going to need numbers, to fight. You need numbers to fight wars, and you're not going to get
Yeah.
someone like me, I'm 56. I served four times. You're not going to get me, and you're not going to be quite honest, I'm going to do everything to keep my son out of these stupid wars. And I can say, hey, I served my time. My son doesn't have to do it, but they could do easily. They could do being part of that selective service. They can uh, get get folks in. That I guess that's
They
what I'm
could.
thinking.
In the '60s, they got a little pushback on the draft and all that stuff. I think if they try to pull the draft out
Yeah.
now,
What are your thoughts?
I think people will go fucking nuts.
Okay.
You know, these
Even if
helicopter
it's
parents. It's
oh
you had the greatest generation that fought in World War II, that had their kids in Vietnam. You got to fight to be an
yeah.
American. You got to
Uh,
fight for this country. People nowadays don't think like that. They go, "You're not doing that to my fucking kid." I mean, you can't yell at a kid in school. They're not going to send the fuckers off to draft.
Good. That's a
It's going
great
to be a
that
politic. It's going to be a political suicide for anybody that calls up the draft.
even with like your thoughts, even with as strong as the brain, I hate to say the brainwashing, but the brainwashing, right? Because we really split as a country, and yeah, I guess I fear that, and I think that it's easy for them. I could see it's easy with a combination of the Supreme Court, the executive order, executive office, and Congress in this. If they set up a wag the dog type situation in Iran or Taiwan,
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I don't know. I don't know that people in this country are going to tolerate us going into another war, especially Donald Trump was crowing about the fact he had no wars, which wasn't true.
true.
But we're in a different world now, and people don't want to see the wars, and they don't want their kids drafted. Um, they used to be that going to war was a positive thing politically and economically. It's not a positive thing politically anymore. If you're a warmonger, you're going to have trouble getting reelected. Now, if Donald Trump wants to do anything with war, you better get that fucker done in 2 years, because anybody who
Mm.
votes for a war, the midterms are going to go against the
Wow.
Republicans anyway, traditionally.
Mhm.
And anybody who votes for a war or to take away Medicare, they're going to fucking lose in
Mm.
2026. And then they
Mm.
will have no power. So nothing will get done the final 2 years, because Donald Trump will never get anything to fucking sign. Um, or if he does, he won't sign it because it'll be a Democratic idea. I don't know. I don't. I just don't even think that traditional war like we've seen it before. We're going to see much of that. And, we're
I
going to have
think you're
people on the
right
ground.
now that you paint that. Say, can you say more on that? Because that you're
We
changing
got
my perspective.
drones now.
Yeah, yeah,
We got computers and stuff.
yep.
I don't know that the whole idea of sending a bunch of kids on the ground in a country to shoot at other kids on the ground in the same country seems a little archaic in this day and age we are now. I mean, there will be some of that, but I don't think to the mass effect that we saw in World War II or Vietnam.
You're right. Yeah, I agree with you. And something that I wasn't thinking of that I think the audience should pay attention to is like when you say, a lot of times I've heard you say this, and it's applicable to the whole military, the whole 2 year thing. It
Yeah,
isn't completely over, right? So it's like 4 years just seems like forever to
yeah.
me. But 2 years, what could happen? Let's say, let's can I ask you this scenario, like how you would think of it? Let's say he goes crazy and he gets some extra money or something like that to build up Trump Tehran hotel and all this stuff, and they're giving them all this fake intel that the Iranians want like a revolution and stand up to their country, um, and want U.S. troops to come in and all this, and he starts. I'm just saying hypothetically speaking, and he, I don't know, sets up some Gulf of Tonkin kind of stuff or some WMD kind of diversion situation in Iran within the first 2 years, and body bags start coming back. Maybe not a lot, but a lot more than in Iraq because the Iranians have a full force military ready to go. The terrain is very, very difficult to operate. It's not like Iraq. Maneuvering is going to demand um, dismounted, a lot of dismounted patrols. So, like you said,
Right.
to send, you know, our boys and gals out there to fight their boys and gals is probably, generals are definitely going to be, like, really kind of startled about that. Um, what in 2 years, let's say, a war is started. They're not meeting their recruitment, but they have enough to sustain, um, uh, a small kind of like invasion, and it's just kind of like a protracted kind of war going. So that can actually hurt him, right? In
Well,
2 years.
well, yeah. The thing about it is
Even if he's saying it's national patriotism and all that. You see, I'm afraid of what happened during the Bush thing because that was totally stupid.
it was totally
Yep.
stupid. And the thing about it is you need to have an act of Congress to go to war. That said, president can attack certain things. Obama did it. Trump
Mhm.
did it. It can be done, uh, but it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. Donald Trump has the capability of doing some crazy and stupid shit, some things that will be politically averse to the Republican Party. And as I've said before, when he gets into office, he becomes a liability. He's no longer an asset. He isn't going to get reelected. He's just going to do things to embarrass the country and the Republican Party. And I think once he is inaugurated, they're going to be looking for ways to dump his ass, whether it be the 25th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, or impeachment. Or let's be honest, we're talking about the Republicans. They have less elegant ways of getting rid of people. And I'm just going to say the
Yeah,
next time they try to do that, it won't be an 18-year-old kid with emotional problems. That, and I'm not saying that
yeah,
to wish
yeah.
that on anybody, but we
Right.
know the Republicans and they do some crazy shit. I honestly think that they're going to want to get rid of Donald Trump as quickly as possible because he's a wild hair. They can't control him. If they get rid of him, they put in JD Vance, and he's a pussy, so we can control him any way we can. I don't think they're going to let him get too out of hand because it's just going to be damaging to the
I,
party.
I'm glad you gave that analysis, and why. Well, I re with your analysis, I reanalyze my position, and I would say that you're saying the next 3 months he will probably try to push for Trump's people will try to push for Iran, because Iran affects this whole situation with Israel and Palestine and all this kind of stuff, and so
Right.
he will probably try to push for a negotiation like the so-called better deal. If he can't get that, I think, like you said, he'd be concerned, or he'd have people around him concerned about 2 years from now. So maybe to do surgical strikes towards the the so-called nuclear sites. I mean, which they can. They don't have WMDs, but they it's just a lot easier now, to get a lot of that stuff going. But they can set up targets, huh?
Yeah, well, he's going to try to whip people up, but I think the Republicans are going to have him on a short leash because
Yeah,
they know how damaging he could be to the country and
yeah.
to the party. Well, we're getting to the end here, Mike. We're
Mhm.
going to wrap things up. Why don't you tell folks where they can find you again? Because if they've listened to you, they no doubt want to find you on the internet. And I know you've got some things you're doing out there, right?
Yep. I thank you for having me on, and this was just great. And it feels like when I listen to you, and I watch your shows, I really get, yeah, I feel better because I've been
I
feeling bad
appreciate
since
that.
the election. Yeah. So I'm at Mike Kim Veteran. You can Google me at Mike Kim Veteran. I have a podcast through the Coming Home Well Network. My views are separate from those of Coming Home Well. They are a veteran education network. I provide veteran and military educational programs. For example, I had Scott Ritter, the nuclear arms. I interviewed him. The nuclear arms negotiator or the inspector. And we just talked about the inspections process. And then I had the secretary of one of the secretaries of the VA during Dr. Lawrence during the
Right.
Trump administration. So you could look up veteran, etc., and Google Mike Kim Veteran, and it was just a pleasure to be a part of the show, and I really appreciate you,
Well, I
as do others.
appreciate you coming. I appreciate you coming on. And as I've said with other guests, anytime you want to come back on, send me an email and we'll figure it out one way or another when's the best time. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk. It's an interesting conversation. It's a conversation we haven't had much really regarding the military and some of the other things going on with politics these days. And there's a lot of things to think about, and it's great getting different perspectives, people with experience in certain areas, uh, teaching me and everybody else that's listening stuff we just don't know about.
Well, thanks, and that's how I feel about you. And like I said, you help the public in regards to being more informed, and I think that's part of the whole voting and the whole, whether it's resistance or advocacy for what we have to do to preserve our American democracy. So thank you very much, Mike, and I'll keep on
Well,
listening.
all right, so it's Mike Kim, veteran. Just Google that and you'll come
Yep.
across some of his stuff. I
Yep.
appreciate it, Mike. Those of you listening, I want to thank you for taking the time to do that. I hope you have a great day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.